So it turns out we were all wrong about the confetti grenade. Now, in my last video, I did say to be fair, it was the best fire grenade because it lights enemies on fire and you get 6 of them compared to 4. And if we look at the stats of the grenade, it only lists 50 damage from the explosive, which is medium armor pen. So, you know, since it only said 50 damage, but it was killing enemies, I just assumed that it was the fire damage that got buffed in the last patch. That must be where all the damage is coming from. And that's where I was wrong, and everyone else was wrong. It turns out that the sparks that this grenade emits rapidly deals damage to anything sitting in the radius. And the damage these sparks deal is heavy armor pen. So these confetti grenades are actually mini thermite on top of everything else. Don't believe me? Well, here's a clip of 2 factory striders and 2 tanks versus 6 confetti grenades.
That is so...
Yeah,
oh my god, the tank's gonna die as well. Look at that, dude.
All right, we can leave.
That was a great bit of footage.
Countdown initiated.
So I tested these confetti grenades against all the heavy relevant, against pretty much all the heavy units in the game. But before we do that, I need to shout out John Spreadsheet, aka Exilius, who manages the main weapon spreadsheet that pretty much the entire community uses. This is all the advanced weapon stats that I've used multiple times in the past to get accurate info from, and I've used this to make many videos here on YouTube. Now, I'm gonna be putting the link to this spreadsheet for anyone who just wants the advanced weapon stats. But the main reason I'm shouting it out today is because I actually, for the first time, noticed he has a donate him a coffee link in the front of it. And realistically, he's actually spent a lot of time updating this spreadsheet every single patch, especially with some of the mechanics and the weapon attachments in the last patch. He actually does spend a lot of time doing this. And so if any of you guys want to share some love his way, that would be awesome, because again, he spends a lot of time keeping this updated and everybody uses this spreadsheet, so I think he deserves the shout out. All right, so this video we're testing it against all the heavy enemies, but let's just talking about the mobbing aspect. The confetti grenade will simply kill any mob, like anything lower than a charger, anything lower than a harvester or a fleshmob, anything lower than a Hulk. If an enemy sits in the sparks of this grenade, it also gets lit on fire. The sparks plus the fire kills pretty much any mob in the game as long as they're sitting in it. Now, if like an alpha commander, for example, doesn't sit in the grenade, it sets them on fire at least, and then it basically does half the health because alpha commanders die to 2 ticks of fire, and that goes for the medium-sized mobs. Pretty much all of them that I've tested fire against die in 2 full ticks of fire. So this grenade is good for mobbing. It is primarily a mobbing grenade, but it can also deal damage to heavies. How much exactly? Well, the sparks deal 20 damage, AP 5, or anti-tank armor pen, and it deals 20 damage 9 times per second. Now, I timed it in game, I just, counted Mississippis, and the sparks seem to last for about 3 seconds. So, 20 times 9 is 180 damage per second, heavy armor pen, and for 3 seconds, that's 540 damage. This is 1/4 the damage of a thermite. So 4 of these equals 1 thermite. And that's just the damage. The breakpoints don't always work out that way. Like, for example, if 2 of these grenades kill a heavy enemy, then you don't necessarily need a full thermite. You might need less sometimes. Now, the main thing when it comes to this grenade is keep in mind that to deal the full spark damage to an enemy needs to be sitting inside of the sparks for the full 3-second duration to get the full damage dealt to them. And that is the downside of this grenade, is that it can feel inconsistent unless you can do some setup, like stunning an enemy with an arc thrower or staggering them with an autocannon, and I did use one of those ideas in the video. Okay, so let's start out with bots, because I realized that this was dealing heavy armor pen when we were doing bot eradicate missions, and I was killing factory striders, tanks, Hulks, in just a couple grenade throws. Now, tanks are the one enemy that if you land this grenade on top of them or you throw it underneath them and let them roll over it, 2 of these confetti grenades have consistently killed tanks for me. Tanks are also pretty slow. They don't move around too much. So this is like the easiest heavy enemy to kill with these grenades, and it seems to be about 2 every time. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the breakpoints. You don't actually need a full thermite to kill tanks. It only takes 2 confetti grenades, which is worth half of a thermite. Now, Hulks, on the other hand, can be tricky. Again, 2 of these grenades kill a Hulk. However, I did notice that after they sat in 1 grenade for the full duration, they would die very quickly after the second one started. So it's more like 1 and some change. So I mentioned the tech, like stunning them with an arc thrower or staggering them with an autocannon. I'll show you guys how I combine this in a second. But for what it's worth, I also wanted to try it without this. So, you know, if your only option is these grenades, you can get fancy and dance around a Flame Hulk and make them run into the sparks. As long as you can get them into 2 sparks of both grenades, they do die pretty consistently. I think Flame Hulk is the hardest enemy to kill with these spark grenades because they do move around the most. All right, so I did mention that it seems to be 1 and some change. So that got me thinking about a weapon that has felt a little bit weird against the bots last patch, the autocannon. Because now the Hulk bodies are only AP4, which means that the autocannon can pierce their bodies and it staggers them. And this has been awkward for some people because when the Hulk is getting staggered around, it does make it harder to hit that headshot. However, that got me thinking, what if I just throw 1 of these confetti grenades and I just stagger the Hulk and make him sit in it, as well as deal some damage to his main health pool? And I figured out 1 confetti grenade plus 3 autocannon body shots to the Hulk killed it. Now, a similar idea could be used with the arc thrower. Okay, so now on to factory striders, because the clip in the start of the video showed me cooking their feet with literally 2 of these grenades each. And that is insane. 2 confetti grenades killing a factory strider, but this is where things get weird. So in squad missions on Eradicates, when I was with a full team, I was consistently killing them in 2 grenades. I can say this for certain. I showed you guys a clip. I'll be farming Eradicates at some point on stream and I'll be using these, so you could come check that out. I've been doing a lot of farming weapon levels for my scythe. However, when I went to test this solo, things got weird. I do believe there is a damage bug in squads where some items can deal more damage, and this seems to be one of them. Because in solo, it took me 5 of these grenades to a single foot to kill a factory strider. And that is not super ideal at all, considering that they all have to land near the same foot. He has to stand on them and not lift up his foot or anything weird because he gets too hot. So I figured since the ultimatum can't one-shot the foot anymore, how many of these grenades plus an ultimatum to kill the foot? And it was 1 ultimatum shot and then 2 of these grenades. Now, this honestly just isn't that good in my opinion. However, if you're in a situation where you need to kill it and you happen to have an ultimatum in these grenades, that can work out for you, so I guess it's good to know that information. And what's crazy about this is it also shows that the damage glitch in squads is giving these an ultimatum's worth of damage, because in squads, it's only 2 of these grenades, but in solo, it was an ultimatum and 2 of these grenades. All right, so moving on, next I think we should cover the squids, because personally my grenade of choice for the squids used to be incendiary impacts. So the sparkler grenades have pretty much been my go-to since the war bond came out. Let's cover harvesters first. Now, these guys are surprisingly very susceptible to being set on fire, and the fire status alone is decent against them. One thing worth noting is I think harvesters is a weird enemy because they have skinny legs and they do tend to move around a lot. It can be pretty hard to make them stand in the grenades. They do also seem to have some unpredictable movements where sometimes they'll just randomly start moving backwards even. Now, I did throw 4 grenades in the clip in the background I'm showing, but I do believe he died in 3. I got chased down by a melee overseer, but you can definitely see the last grenade in the clip. The sparks were not on it at all. Now, one thing I did notice is that these grenades also kill the shield. So I think it's the sparks hitting the shield. I'm not sure if you set a harvester on fire if that breaks the shield. A harvester with a bunch of voteless surrounding it, that is the perfect spot to throw these grenades into. All right, so next up is the Fleshmobs, and we now have stats on the Fleshmob. They have 6,000 health. It should normally even take 3 thermites because thermite deals 2,000 damage. unless some weird damage stacking thing is happening. But it takes 3 thermites to be able to kill a Fleshmob. So how many sparkler grenades does it take? Because these are some tanky boys. Now I happen to find this Fleshmob standing still, and this kind of shows the downside of these grenades is they do happen to bounce around a lot of the time. 2 out of my first 3 grenades, I totally missed it. I think as I get practice with these, I'll just get a bit better at it. So the first one I threw did set it on fire, but it didn't sit in the sparklers. And then 2 more grenades, he did sit fully in the sparklers, and he seemed to die after this. Now he has a slow death animation, so I threw a 3rd one, but I noticed that the 3rd one didn't actually set him on fire. So I think he was dead before I threw this 3rd one. So that is 1 fire tick plus sitting completely in 2 of these. Now I found another Fleshmob to go try this again, and again, he died in about 3 grenade throws. So I do believe they need to fully sit in at least 2 of these, and then maybe a little bit more damage after that, like a full fire tick, or blast your machine gun with it. So 3 of these grenades to kill a Fleshmob. Does that mean that these are viable against Fleshmobs? Yes, absolutely. However, I don't think that you should just rely only on these grenades to kill the Fleshmobs. So let's say he only sits in 1 of these grenades, and that's like 40% of his health. These guys have 6,000 health. That's gonna be way less ammo from spraying your machine gun into it. And what I can say in practice, I've been using these sparkler grenades against the squids since the Warbond came out, and I was using incendiary impacts before that anyway. Setting the Fleshmobs on fire in general just burns a lot of their health. So just pretty much in general, like, I wouldn't rely on these grenades to kill Fleshmobs, but like set them on fire with it, kill all the voteless near it, and then it'll like just be a lot weaker on from that point to blast your machine gun into. I think these grenades are absolutely worth using them against them, just not as like the main way to kill them. All right, so now for Overseers, this is the last relevant enemy, mainly the melee and the Crescent Overseers. The jetpack dude is flying somewhere. You're not gonna hit him with these confetti grenades. Now, just in general, Overseers die to 2 ticks of fire. This makes the Scythe really good against them and both the fire shotguns. Like, set it on fire once, let it burn, he goes out of fire, set him on fire again, and he's dead. 2 ticks of fire. So if they sit in the sparks at all, 1 single grenade throw will kill them. And then if they don't sit in the sparks, like just getting set on fire from these, killing a bunch of voteless near them, that's half of their HP anyway. Again, a lot less ammo from your machine gun. These grenades are absolutely good against the non-flying Overseers. It's that simple. And again, any voteless that walks through fire simply dies. So like, and there's tons of them around the battlefield. I prefer using, I don't think anyone uses thermite against squids unless they're crazy enough to just bring thermite only for the harvesters. These grenades are absolutely good against this faction, in my opinion. And you get 6 of these compared to 4 incendiary impacts. All right, so on to the bugs, and this testing was pretty interesting. We're gonna be starting with chargers and then on to impalers, and I even managed to kill a Bile Titan with nothing but these grenades. So first up is chargers. Now, notably, I just happened to notice this, but the actual explosion from these grenades do heavy stagger the chargers. Like, they get completely knocked away from that blast. All right, but how fast does it kill them? Well, after 3 of these grenade throws sitting in the sparks, it does trigger the bleed out. So the charger will still be walking around after 3 grenades, but it will bleed out and die pretty soon after. If you want them dead, it'll take 4. Now, again, I don't think it's really viable to rely on these grenades to kill a charger because chargers are charging around. But, you know, imagine a bug breach is happening. You're throwing these grenades on there to kill the mobs. Chargers are coming out of them at the same time. You drop a gas strike and then they start circling around in there and they stay in the sparklers, or there's some gas mines around. Same idea. So some of these grenades in the breach, killing the mobs, as well as damaging the chargers. Maybe someone drops an airstrike that wouldn't have killed a charger, but now it'll kill a damaged charger. I'll be honest, these grenades really aren't ideal for chargers, but as a mobbing grenade that does have a chance to kill them, there is some value there, and especially combined with gas or just any other airstrike that comes down, I do think there is some value against chargers, but it's not super ideal. All right, so next up is the Impalers. You know, when the Impaler sticks its head into the ground, imagine you throw one of these grenades and it kills it. That would be amazing. Now, unfortunately, it again took 4 grenades to kill Impalers. I tried this against the first Impaler. It just took 4 grenades to kill it. The second Impaler I tried this on, it didn't kill it, but it happened to rip off the front leg armor, so I guess it was damaging the leg instead of the head, but it did leave it very low. I just blasted it once with the cookout, and it died almost instantly. Now, there is one thing to say about Impalers, that the mouth underneath is always vulnerable. Their head doesn't necessarily need to be tucked into the ground. And I actually think if their head is tucked into the ground, then you're not dealing damage to the weak spot on the forehead. You might be damaging the main health, so that's why it took so many. These grenades do seem to heavily weaken them, and I think fire damage in general heavily weakens larger enemies, but also at the same time, again, not the best option. Maybe just a last second panic button. Impalers don't move around too much, so like if you have nothing, like your 500's on cooldown and you need to kill these guys, just throw 4 of these grenades at them and run away, and you know that it's most likely going to take them out with the sparks and fire. Maybe a 5th grenade for good luck. But in the end, not so good for Impalers in my opinion. You just kind of have that panic button compared to other options. All right, so now for Bile Titan. I'm not expecting much here, but the hope and the dream is that our little sparklers can kill this bad boy. So even though I'm not expecting much, I did have a plan. Shoot out the Bile Titan sack with a Scorcher, so that way it stops spitting and it goes into Stompy mode. Then I'm going to constantly bait the melee attack, and I'm going to confetti the back legs, because the back legs are only heavy armor pen, but confetti is anti-tank armor pen. And I'll be honest, it took a lot of grenades here, but it is possible and I did it. I am proud of that fact alone. And this is definitive proof that these grenades do deal heavy armor pen. It's able to kill a Bile Titan back leg. These are mini thermites, but unfortunately they're not reliable for any of the bug heavies. They're definitely the closest to viable on chargers, since chargers are just littered around all the mobs, and gas is also a common option, keeping them kind of confined in that area. You really do need to get the heavies to sit in the full duration of the sparklers to deal the full damage. Maybe some sort of arc thrower setup and a sparkler underneath it could be kind of cool. I don't know. Against bugs in general, these grenades do feel good because they will kill any alpha commanders or stalkers or any sort of tankier mobs that sit in the sparklers. The fire alone kills all the smaller enemies, and the fire alone also gets through half the HP of enemies like alpha commanders, but it's really not good against any of the heavies if we're being honest. So like, you know, comparing to a Fleshmob, if you burn down half of a Fleshmob's HP, that's very valuable because they're unarmored from all angles. You could just blast them with a stalwart even after that. But against a charger, if you burn half of its HP, you can't really finish it off with a stalwart after that. It's really not going to do much in that department. You know, even if you set a charger on fire and burn half of its HP, you still have to shoot it in the head with a rocket, or you still have to shoot the entire butt off. You're not really getting that benefit against the bugs like you are some of these other factions. Against bugs, this is just a mobbing option, and in that case, I might honestly still rather bring gas grenades. But it is worth noting that you do get 6 sparklers, which is really good for bug holes, because there's a lot more bug holes compared to fabricators or UFOs. So there is that to take into account, that it is a good mobbing grenade against the faction, that you get 6 of them for the bug holes. Against bots, I will definitely be experimenting with these a lot more with weapons like the autocannon or the arc thrower that can kind of stun or stagger hulks. The sparkler grenade is very useful against tanks. I was killing them in 2 throws every time consistently because they don't move around that much. And it has that really niche, but probably not useful against factory striders, and that's okay. Unless you're playing squads, where it's only 2 to the feet of them, and I will be using these on Eradicate farming. So let me know what you think in the comments. This was just my testing and my thoughts. I know everyone's not gonna use these, but they actually were way better than I thought, and they deal more damage than the game tells you. So be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. I'm out.